I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as read at the last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Okay, now what we need to do, and Dan, maybe you can do this, explain this. One of our issues is how we, when we approve the library invoices, is how we match it up against the trust funds that are scheduled for those invoices. And so we have a few questions about that, Dan. I'm gonna let you carry it from there since.
Well, I mean, do you want to just give the background of sort of how?
You give the background.
Where do we start? Go ahead.
Okay, when we receive the invoices, okay, it's our responsibility to make sure that the funds are coming out of the right trust and that there's sufficient funds to match those invoices, okay? And we've had a difficult time the last meeting to do that. So we'd sort of like to ask you what your process is and how you go about deciding how it's gonna go. I know you have your own trust funds at the library, but we have trust funds here for you. We want to make sure that we're approving the right amounts against the right trusts.
Okay, so, can I just?
Yeah, if you want, we can go with an example.
So, this top page is provided to the trustees?
Mhm.
Okay,
So the entire, we provide the entire invoice.
okay. But this top page is provided to the trustees because
Yes.
the answer to the question on invoices matching up to the trust funds. The name of the trust fund is listed on this
Mhm.
batch listing page to the invoice. So the PDF. So that's.
So that's the
answer to
invoice
that
there.
question.
I think the concern was that the accounts, we wanted to make sure that we weren't overcharging the accounts and they
So
weren't
you don't
approving
provide
something that
that
was
information to
overcharged.
the trustees?
We provide a update as to the account balances, but
Right,
I just wanted, I think we wanted to know if there was a check from the library perspective, if something was being done on the library side.
there is.
There is,
Yeah.
okay.
Jen, did you want to
Correct.
talk to that long
I think that's.
process?
Sure. So what happens is that Rockland Trust provides you with a very detailed for everything, for all the trust funds
Mhm.
operated by the town.
Mhm.
And then you divvy it up for departments. So usually, late fall from you, we receive an Excel document that shows all of the library's trust funds and its earnings from the last fiscal year. From that point in time, our Board of Library Trustees has voted to retain a part of the earnings, and it's usually 10%, but depending on the trust fund, it could be different. And we set that aside to be untouched to continue earning revenue in perpetuity for the library. From there, we take the remaining balance of our newly earned funding, and we add it to any existing balance that was unspent in previous fiscal years. So from there, we have a budget amount that we can spend, and we make sure we don't go over that. We allocate to each of our librarians who are in charge of purchasing materials for the library. We give them a set amount and they don't go over it. So we're not able to place orders for everything that we have all at once because that's just not how books work. So, so we usually, over about a 3-month window, we spend the bulk of our budget, but we're also sometimes buying things that have long publication dates, world language publishers from overseas. It might take months for those to come to us. So sometimes we place an order in May or June and we might not receive that item until November. But we have tracking in place at the library for all of our expenditures, not just trust funds. We also have other funding sources and we do track all of those expenditures as well.
How do you determine, like, if you're gonna make a purchase, which pool of money it comes from? Seems like you have a lot of choices.
Well, we know in advance from the operating budget that we're going to be getting the bulk of our circulating fiction and nonfiction, children's books and young adult books. From there, we do a lot of tracking across various genres, various demographics. And we typically go from there where we'll say, okay, we're gonna spend $1,000 on early reader books, nonfiction and fiction over this time period. And there's a librarian who's given that number, and then each time they place an order, it draws from a bucket. We have spreadsheets offline to track that. We might also, a lot of our circulating collections come from the operating budget. Special collections will draw from trust funds or other funding sources.
But we follow the restrictions of trust funds. Some don't have restrictions, some do, and that dictates the spending on those trust funds.
Like, we have a visually impaired fund, so
Mhm.
that would be large print books or technologies for people with visual challenges. We have one trust fund that talks about, I think it's business. So that one's a little trickier because there's not always $2,000 worth of business books in any given year.
The financial database.
Right, yeah, there's a little bit of leeway with some of those. But we spend a lot of time looking at what our patrons actually check out, so we might have money lingering in a trust fund, but not want to purchase large art books or something like that at that point in time.
I do have a question about the report that Barbara from Rockland, that you get. Do you need that every quarter, or it's just the end of the fiscal year that you require it?
Historically, it's come to us annually, but if you receive it more frequently, that would be informative.
Okay, I do, I receive it every quarter,
Oh,
so I can make sure you get it every quarter.
alright.
That's helpful.
We do submit an annual budget to our trustees for trust fund spending, which they approve typically before the fiscal year begins.
Okay.
For that coming fiscal year,
When's your fiscal year begin?
July 1.
July 1, okay.
I don't know, maybe you'll be happier if you only see it once a year.
Be nice to see some patterns as we're looking at our other funding sources. We have some things that we do on a calendar year, so if we knew going into a calendar year that our trust funds were not performing really well, we might shift a couple of things around.
Right, because in the past, we've in the late fall received information about the fiscal year that's just ended June 30th in preparation for spring vote for the next fiscal year. And if we did have quarterly information that showed something not so rosy, we could guard against what we were proposing for spending for the next fiscal year.
Have you received this past fiscal year yet? I can't recall.
We were
Not
not 24, but 23 we received
Okay,
this past spring,
so
June.
So we're working off a budget that we got with information from fiscal year 23. So
Okay.
the money has been sitting there for a while and we are now starting to draw it down.
So
Oh.
typically,
Oh,
we,
that's interesting that it's 23 that you're working with right now.
Well, so fiscal year 23
closing.
closeout,
Right.
we get those numbers.
Typically in the late fall, like in November, we receive the information for the fiscal year that just ended. And then we
Oh,
prepare.
So you
our
haven't
budget.
yet received fiscal year 24, because it's not
Correct.
yet November. Okay.
Right, so typically we receive that in late fall and then we prepare a trust fund budget for approval by our trustees in the spring. For spending to start on July 1 of that year.
Occasionally, we start spending before that. It depends on,
Is there, I'm sorry, is there a full year gap essentially?
yes.
I see.
I have questions, but I'm trying to take notes and think of what my questions are, so just give me 1 second. All right, so I'm the rookie commissioner, so that's why I don't necessarily know this already. So you received this spreadsheet and you described, Jenna, that the information that is used is earnings. So whatever the earnings have been, so it's not a percentage of the account, it's earnings, is that right?
A percentage
To
of,
start.
of the earnings is allocated towards our
And then,
unexpendable
yeah.
budget.
So you start with the earnings number.
And gain loss, it's netted, if I remember correctly on the spreadsheet, although the spreadsheet has changed over the last 4 or 5 years, so there's been some transition in how the information is presented.
And then the 10%, so whatever that number is, the library tends to say that 10% we're not going to expend. So it's like a set aside or
A
accumulation.
minimum of 10%. Some of our other funds have a higher requirement to add to the unexpendable balance.
Okay,
I believe that the wording is that 90%. There's one fund where 90% of the earnings are shifted to the unexpendable balance until it hits a specific number in the millions, which won't happen for either of us.
okay.
That part, I mean, unless it's Dan or here.
So it's whatever, so then the board, after running that 90% or whatever calculation, also being sensitive to particular terms of certain funds, then that's what's considered the expendable balance. And as you are receiving invoices over the course of the year, you keep track of drawing on that expendable balance and make sure that you don't go beyond it.
Right, because that's
Okay.
the plan that the trustees approved, so that's what guides us.
Okay, got
Can we actually step way back for a second? When you say earnings, can you tell me exactly what you mean by earnings?
There's a column that
Yeah.
says gain loss and interest and some other terminologies like that. So we're only look when the fund has increased in value.
Yeah.
Whatever the increase is.
Okay, so all things, realized gains, unrealized gains, dividends, everything, just whatever the value was versus whatever it is.
Over
that's
the
earned.
last few years, I don't know if it was a different bank than Rockland Trust 5 years ago, so at least you might be able to
It's,
speak to that.
we did change the presentation a little bit. We used. to-
Yes.
Yeah,
It has had 2 different names in my experience,
okay.
but it's that column where we're looking at.
And so what
only
would
there's
you
a positive
do,
amount.
what would you do if there were a loss for a year, which could easily happen?
And it has happened, yes. So in that case, it depends on our expenses from that fund over the last few years. There are some funds that we don't touch. If they're earning us, if it's a fund with a smaller balance or a fund that we had a larger expenditure from, we might not touch again for a few years. So if there is negative earnings, then it might mean that we're not touching that fund, or it might mean that it's cutting into last year's expendable balance. We're sensitive to that. But we do tend to, if you look at the name of the trust fund, which is always on the report, you'll see a few trust funds that we use regularly and reliably, and then we might just have one invoice from a trust fund in any given fiscal year, and then not touch it again for a few more years. So
Got it.
we do have a process in place for that. Fortunately, there's only been one really bad year in my memory. And then so we had a year when we were not spending a lot from trust funds, and the following year, we were still catching up to making sure that our unexpendable balance was brought back up to that solid cushion.
It could, could easily happen. You have a down 15% year or whatever, and then it takes potentially a
years to
couple of
come
years.
back, yeah. Well, we do have other funding sources, so we're not relying solely on trust funds. We have our operating budget, we have state aid, we have our permanent donation fund, includes mostly checks, small checks from donors as gifts. So we don't rely on the permanent donation fund to be an interest earning account, but we are still able to expend from it every year. And that's a 1-for-1, like when I get a check for $25, we know that it increases our expendable amount by $25. We're also relying on trust funds generally to boost our special collections rather than providing our normal circulating popular fiction.
this is incredibly helpful to
Oh,
understand
that's nice to
all
hear.
that's happening on your end.
Okay.
That just for me, I had no idea all the checks. And I don't mean the things that you buy things with, but just the double checking.
Oh,
that
yeah.
you do of everything. It's,
Mhm.
gives me a lot of confidence in the
Well,
information
that's
we
good to hear.
receive.
I mean, I've always viewed our trust funds as, I mean, it's in the name trust, but a lot of them come from donors with named funds, and I want to honor that donation. So, yeah, we're really careful with it.
Great.
And all invoices come to the trustees for approval, before they arrive here. So that occurs.
Okay.
How actually, and maybe this is a question for you, Lisa, what it actually is the process, kind of like the short version, but start to finish when you've placed an order, it gets invoiced, what actually happens then?
Well, before we place an order, we already know the funding source
Yeah.
for whatever item we're buying. The order is not placed until we've identified our funding source. Most of our orders are placed online. We have a selector that would choose, but we also have our tech services department, which processes the orders for them. So there's always two people looking at it. The person that places the order isn't the person that receives the box, so that's a check and balance right there too. And then our tech services department is the group that gets our physical materials ready for circulation. So checking to make sure that they've got the covers and the stickers and the barcodes, and that when you scan the barcode, it identifies it correctly. From there, for trust funds, we do usually identify within the book its funding source. We don't always do that for small gifts, because if someone says, I want $25 worth of gardening books, it might take a while to get to that place. We're not usually doing a one-to-one for a person's gift, but for a named trust fund, we do identify that. And then it can take up to 6 weeks in a regular cycle for an order or for a book to be selected, and then to go through the process, and then for it to get out on the shelf.
Got it. How then does that invoice and that, like, how do we get to this stack, basically?
Our tech
Okay.
services department receives materials and has a packing slip, and that's a town process where they're checking against the packing slip. And then they compare the packing slip to the invoice, they give them both to me. I do another check to make sure I'm not necessarily looking at every one of 300 titles, but I will give it just a sanity check and make sure, is this the right number of packing slips associated with an order? Do I see some of the titles on there? Am I missing anything? So I'm the one taking a physical invoice and typing it into the system. I print it out, Rob checks every single one of them, catches when I transpose the number.
Doesn't
Like
matter.
humans, yeah. And
Um,
that's in Infinite Visions.
That's an Infinite Vision,
Okay.
yeah,
Which is the accounting software.
yeah. And
the
there's,
Backup is included along with the invoice, so
Yeah.
if you see these stamped packing lists that are checked off, that's what that is.
these invoices have had about 5 or 6 people looking at them before they come to you.
Okay, and then
And
after,
after I sign, we hold these until our monthly trustees meeting, and this other signature you see here besides mine is the chair of the board of trustees, who signs them after the trustees vote to approve the payment of these invoices. And they're given a list of the trust funds and the invoices that have come in to be paid out of those trust funds.
And they also receive a monthly report showing what the planned expenditure was and how the expenses have been going so far. So that's prepared monthly for the trustees to review at their meeting.
there's separate, yeah, it seems like there are plenty of internal controls. It's just, it's great to know that, you know, it's going through all these eyes are able to kind of determine if it is going to the right accounts and what's going on, so. Great.
No further questions? Thank you very much. Okay.
Very satisfied. Thank you
Okay.
both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Me too.
Nice to
Maybe
meet
I'll
you.
see you walking around in it.
You need to call recess for me to go grab.
Yeah, I'm gonna call a recess right now. So
Okay.
we can get this thing, so we can approve these invoices.
Restarting.
These are the library invoices, and then this is from the Paul Good.
Oh, okay.
I'm drawing a blank. I know the acronym, but
Is it
Oh, from
community?
the town. I forget what it's called, so.
I'll find it.
NCRTF,
Today is
the,
22nd.
24.
24th.
24. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So these are library and NC.
Yes, so it's the Needham
Community
Community-
Revitalization Trust.
Revitalization Trust Fund, NCRTF.
Is that something separate from like the community, what's it called, the tax surcharge that we have?
CPA, the Community
Preservation
Preservation.
Act.
Yep.
This is totally separate.
So this is totally separate. I don't know if they use funds, I don't, from the CPA that's on the tax bills to, I don't know what general ledger accounts it hits, but it would fall under that umbrella where you could use it for that. So,
Okay.
no problem. It was interesting to hear how much, how many people are able to view these invoices before it reaches the commissioners.
And they have their own trust funds too.
I mean, it's a lot of money and a lot of volume,
Mhm.
especially a lot
It's
of
very
volume.
confident, yes.
Yeah.
I wish they had more author presentations up there. More than an author who wrote a book, it's a local author. And they have the book.
Maybe you can write to Jenna.
Some towns have a book of the summer that they read, they announce what book everybody's gonna read for the
Like a
summer.
community read.
Yeah.
The schools do that.
Yeah.
Does Needham have the digital, I have a digital book. Pass,
Libby?
Libby,
Yes.
I guess, so I
Yes.
feel like I've been collecting library cards accidentally. I think I probably have 3. Austin Public Library, you're able to get a NCRTF. And there are no updates yet from Rockland about the trust fund, so I'm still waiting on them, so.
How old is it?
I haven't heard anything from Rockland Trust, and I can follow up with Barbara to see if there are any updates for the trust fund, but she hasn't reached out.
No. Our next event, have we had that in this year? We had them in the spring, I think,
Yeah, that sounds about right.
and we'll do it again next spring.
You mean the scholarship thing? Or what are you referring to, Joe?
I was referring to Rockland Trust coming and giving.
Oh, yes, they,
investment
yeah.
Presentation.
I think it was around May,
Yeah.
because that's when I had started. So
And when do we usually have Ann Galati come over and talk to us about the scholarships? Do that in January, do that in December? Do that in January.
check.
No, not to check. Wait. I don't-
Will that be your last meeting?
No, the town election is April. So the March meeting.
All right, the nomination is January 1st.
Joe Biden.
Right. Okay. I hope you're gonna be able to spend it in a warm place this winter.
I'm here on the,
Okay. Next to a fire, maybe.
So does everyone agree that we should have Ann Galati in January to talk about the scholarships?
How do you spell Galati?
Gulati.
Gulati.
She has a new building that she's working in. You seen the new building?
It's open now?
So she's from the high school
Yeah,
to talk about, okay.
and the
I
administrative
think it's like
center is,
assistant superintendent for finance, I believe is what type.
And she provided us with the list of those who received the scholarship. So the school had a list of all those individuals.
Right.
Which shared. It was requested a month or two ago.
Do you have in the minutes, Dan, what our November meeting is? Is that there?
On November 18th at
November.
5 p.m.
November 18th. Okay.
and, okay, what we have to do is, because we're supposed to be
Yeah, December.
in December, since we're gonna be going out, I think we should do it earlier in the month, unless someone objects to that.
Whatever day. we'll
We
see.
generally do it around the 10th or the 15th, something like that.
Okay.
And, get my trusty calendar out. So we have the 18th of November. And between the 12th and the 19th, we should do it. 19th, you get pretty close to a lot of Christmas parties and everything,
Mhm.
so.
How about the 9th?
The 9th works for me.
Well, let me make sure it works.
Yeah, and we want to meet later in the day, like 5 o'clock or something.
Yeah, 9th would work for me.
So December 9th at 5 p.m.
Yeah. Still leaning towards Blue on Highland. Either that or I won't go to Conrad's. I'll save you that problem. I looked at the menu at Conrad's. It's not quite up to our needs. It makes Bertucci's look like a fancy restaurant.
But those rolls are pretty good, I think. That fresh bread.
Why, was there a reason on the 18th we were starting at 5? Was that just one of us had a conflict? Do you remember?
You folks picked it up since I'm always.
I will
available.
look.
So, I mean, it could have been me, I just don't remember.
I just want to add this, so just. What's that?
Was it because you, no? No,
I can't tell from my calendar.
I think it was
why.
because of me. I have a conflict where that half hour helps me.
Okay.
That's what it is.
okay,
Mhm.
all right, so, that's all set. We will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nice have it.